August 29th, 1981. Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero picks up the phone. The voice on the other end is calm, but it doesn't need to say much. Lefty already understands. In his world, calls like this don't come with good news. They come with a message, and that message is simple. You've been called in. For most people, this might sound like a meeting. For Lefty, it means something else entirely. It means judgment. Lefty doesn't panic. He doesn't argue. He doesn't ask questions. He already knows the rules. He has spent his entire life living by them. Running is not an option. In fact, running would make things worse. It would confirm guilt. It would turn suspicion into certainty. And in his world, that would guarantee a much worse ending. So instead, he does what he has always done. He accepts it. He gets dressed slowly, carefully. This is not just routine. This is preparation. A man like Lefty understands what this moment could mean. He has seen it happen to others. He has heard the stories. He knows how these meetings end. And still, he goes. Or at least he starts to, because before he can reach that final destination, something unexpected happens. The FBI steps in. Agents intercept him before he arrives. They place him under arrest. No struggle, no chaos, just a quiet but powerful moment. And without even planning it that way, they save his life. To understand why, you need to understand who Lefty was. Lefty Ruggiero wasn't new to this world. He wasn't careless. He wasn't inexperienced. He had spent decades inside one of the most powerful organized crime families in New York, the Bonanno family. This wasn't just a job for him. It was his identity. His entire life was built around it. From a young age, he learned the rules. Stay loyal, stay quiet, do your work, trust carefully. And most importantly, never break the code. Lefty grew up in New York during hard times. The streets were crowded, money was tight, opportunities were limited. But in his neighborhood, there was a different kind of power. You could see it in certain men. They walked into rooms and people noticed. They had respect, they had control, they had influence, and Lefty paid attention. He didn't join through a formal process. Nobody filled out forms or submitted applications. He simply stayed close. He ran small errands. He proved he could be trusted. He kept his mouth shut when it mattered most. Over time, people noticed. And in that world, being noticed is how everything begins. By the time he was in his 20s, Lefty had built a reputation. Not as someone reckless, but as someone reliable. He was known for being precise, careful, disciplined. He didn't make unnecessary moves. He didn't leave loose ends. That reputation followed him for years. Over time, he became connected to many serious crimes. People suspected his involvement in multiple violent acts, but there was one thing that stood out. He was never convicted. Not once. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone understands exactly how the system works and how to stay ahead of it. For Lefty, violence wasn't emotional, it wasn't random. It was controlled, it was calculated, and most importantly, it was clean. But despite everything he did, despite all the years he gave, despite the risks he took, Lefty never moved up. He stayed at the same level. While others, some younger, some less experienced, were promoted, given more power, and earned more money, Lefty stayed where he was. Did it bother him? Yes. People close to him say he talked about it sometimes, not loudly, not aggressively, but it was there. A quiet frustration. Still, he never left, because for Lefty, there was nowhere else to go. This life wasn't something he could walk away from. It was the only life he knew. And then, in 1976, everything changed. A man walked into his world. His name was Donnie Brasco. Donnie seemed different, but in a good way. He was sharp, smart, confident. He knew how to talk, he knew how to move, he understood the system, and most importantly, he looked trustworthy. So he made a decision. He vouched for him. Now, in that world, vouching for someone is not a small thing. It's not just saying, I trust this guy. It's saying, I take responsibility for everything this man does. If that person makes a mistake, you pay. If that person betrays the organization, you pay with your life. It's one of the most serious commitments a person can make. And Lefty made it. For 6 years, Donnie and Lefty worked together. They spent time together, made money together, built connections together. They traveled, they planned, they operated as partners. To Lefty, Donnie wasn't just another associate. He was someone he believed in. But there was one thing Lefty didn't know. Donnie Brasco wasn't who he said he was. His real name was Joe Pistone, and he was an undercover FBI agent. For 6 years, Pistone had been carefully building this identity. He didn't rush, he didn't force anything. He let trust grow naturally. He blended in. He learned everything: names, faces, operations, conversations, everything. And Lefty, despite all his experience, still believed in loyalty, still believed in trust, and that belief is what made this story possible. By 1981, things had gone too far. Donnie was getting close to becoming a full member. That was a line the FBI couldn't allow him to cross. So they made a decision. They pulled him out. One day, Donnie simply disappeared. No warning, no explanation. He was there, and then he was gone. At first, there was confusion, then suspicion, then questions, and finally, the truth. Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent. And in that moment, everything changed. Because in Lefty's world, mistakes like this don't get forgiven, they get answered. And that's why on August 29th, 1981, when the phone rang, Lefty already knew. When the truth came out, it didn't explode all at once. It spread slowly, like quiet whispers moving through rooms from one person to another. At first, it was confusion. Where is Donnie? Why did he disappear? Then came suspicion. Something didn't feel right. And then finally, the truth landed. Donnie Brasco was not a trusted associate. He was an undercover FBI agent. 6 years. That's how long he had been inside. 6 years of listening, watching, learning, and recording everything. Think about that for a moment. Every conversation, every deal, every name, all of it was now in the hands of the government. The damage was massive. This wasn't just one mistake. This was exposure at the deepest level. And in that world, when something like this happens, there is only one response. Someone has to answer for it. The organization didn't react with panic. It reacted with control. Cold, quiet, direct. They didn't ask if someone would be held responsible. They decided who. 2 names stood at the center of it all: Lefty Ruggiero and his superior, Anthony Sonny Black Napolitano. Sonny Black had more power, more authority. He was the one who allowed Donnie to move deeper into the organization. He introduced him to higher-level members. He opened doors that should have stayed closed. Lefty, on the other hand, had vouched for Donnie from the beginning. He was the one who said, "This man is solid." And in that world, those words carry weight, heavy weight. So now both men had to face the consequences. Sonny Black was called in first. When he got the message, he didn't hesitate. He understood exactly what it meant. Men like him always do. Before leaving, he did something small, but very important. He handed over his jewelry and personal items. That act says everything without saying a word. It means, I know I'm not coming back. He went to the meeting, and he never returned. Months later, his body was found. That was the end of his story. A man who had spent his life inside the system was finally consumed by it. Now it was Lefty's turn. He received the same kind of call, the same kind of message, the same kind of ending waiting for him. And just like Sonny Black, Lefty didn't run, he didn't argue, he didn't try to escape. He prepared himself. Because in his mind, this was part of the life he chose. You live by the rules, and if the time comes, you face the outcome. But something different happened this time. While all of this was unfolding, the FBI was watching closely. They understood what was about to happen. They knew Lefty was walking toward a meeting he would not survive. And here's the strange part of the story. The same operation that put Lefty in danger was now about to save him. On the morning of August 29, 1981, just before Lefty could reach that meeting, federal agents stepped in. They stopped him. They arrested him. No violence, no drama, just a quiet moment that changed everything. Lefty went from walking toward death to sitting in federal custody. This arrest was not just about charges, it was also protection. Because once he was in custody, he was out of reach. But that didn't mean things were over, not even close. The case against him was strong, very strong. For 6 years, the FBI had been collecting information. They had recordings, they had surveillance, they had financial details, they had inside knowledge from Joe Pistone himself. This wasn't guesswork, this was a carefully built case. Lefty was charged with serious crimes connected to organized operations across multiple states. There was no easy way out. In 1982, he was convicted. The sentence meant years in prison, years he would spend behind bars. And this is where the story takes another important turn, because now Lefty had a choice. He could cooperate, he could speak, he could give information in exchange for a lighter sentence. Many people in his position would have done exactly that. It would have been the practical choice, the smart choice. But Lefty didn't. He stayed silent. He didn't talk about the organization. He didn't reveal new details. He didn't give names. Even after everything that had happened, even after being betrayed by the system he gave his life to, even after nearly losing his life because of it, he said nothing. That silence came with a cost, years of his life, time he would never get back. But that same silence also gave him something else, something just as important. It kept him alive. Because if he had spoken, if he had broken the code, he would not have been safe, not inside prison, not outside. Organizations like this don't forget, and they don't forgive. So in a strange way, the same rule that had kept him stuck for decades, the same silence that never earned him success, now became his protection. It was the only thing he had left, and it worked. While others faced consequences in different ways, Lefty sat quietly in prison, holding on to the only rule he had never broken. And that brings us to a powerful question. Was that silence strength, or simply the only thing he knew how to do? Because by this point, one thing is clear. Lefty had given everything to a system that gave him very little in return. And yet, even now, he stayed loyal to it.
By the time Lefty Ruggiero sat in prison, everything had changed. The life he had built over decades was gone. The people he trusted were either gone or had turned away. And the system he gave everything to had already decided his fate long before the FBI ever stepped in. Now there was only one thing left: time. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. Lefty spent over a decade behind bars, not fighting, not arguing, not explaining, just sitting and staying silent. And that silence is what defines the final chapter of his story. Because Lefty had a choice, a real one. He could have worked with the government. He could have shared information. He could have reduced his sentence and made his life easier. But he didn't. Even after everything, after being overlooked for years, after nearly being killed for something that wasn't even a betrayal, after losing his place, his power, and his future, he still followed the same rule. He didn't talk. To some people, that might seem hard to understand. Why stay loyal to something that never rewarded you? Why protect a system that was ready to destroy you? But for Lefty, this wasn't about logic. It was about identity. This was the only way he knew how to live, the only code he had ever followed. And breaking it, even at the end, was not something he could do. And here's the truth that makes this story even more powerful. That silence is what kept him alive. If Lefty had spoken, things would have been very different. Inside prison, there were still connections, still influence, still people who remembered everything. And if he had crossed that line, he would not have been safe anywhere. So his silence was not just loyalty, it was protection, it was survival. Two things can be true at the same time, and in Lefty's case, they were. Years passed. His life moved forward, but only in one place, behind walls. Meanwhile, outside, the impact of the FBI operation continued to grow. Joe Pistone's undercover work became one of the most important operations in law enforcement history. It led to hundreds of convictions, it exposed deep networks, and it became a model for how these operations are done. But behind all of that success, there was a human cost, and Lefty was part of that cost. Joe Pistone himself later spoke about it. He said that out of everyone he met during those 6 years, his relationship with Lefty felt the most real. Not fake, not forced, but real. And that's what makes this story different from most, because in the middle of an operation built on deception, a real connection existed. And that connection came with consequences. Lefty lost years of his life, years he could never get back, time when most people slow down, enjoy life, and spend time with family. Instead, he spent those years in prison, quiet, unnoticed, still holding on to the same code. In April 1993, Lefty was finally released. He was 66 years old. But he wasn't the same man anymore. He was sick. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and his release came not as freedom in the usual sense, but as a final chance to spend his remaining time outside prison walls. He had served 11 years, and now he had limited time left. For a short period, he lived outside, not as a powerful figure, not as someone important, just as a man nearing the end of his life. On November 24, 1994, Lefty Ruggiero passed away. He was 68 years old. And here's something that stands out the most. He didn't die in violence. He didn't die in fear. He died in a hospital bed. For someone who lived the life he lived, that kind of ending was rare, almost impossible. Most men with his past don't get that kind of ending. Their stories end suddenly, in unexpected places, without warning. But Lefty's story ended quietly. And that brings us to something important. Years later, a film was made about this story. It showed a version where Lefty walks into that final meeting, accepts his fate, and never comes back. It's a powerful ending, emotional, dramatic, memorable. But it's not the real one. The real ending is more complicated, more human. He didn't die for the code. He lived because of it. Not in a victorious way, not in a way that brought him success or happiness, but in a very real way, a very quiet way. The same silence that held him back for years, the same silence that never earned him recognition, the same silence that kept him at the bottom. That silence saved his life. Because in the end, you cannot punish a man for speaking if he never speaks. And that is the truth at the center of this story.
Lefty gave over 30 years to something that never fully gave back. He followed every rule. He stayed loyal. He believed in the system. And when everything fell apart, he didn't change. That raises a question that still doesn't have a clear answer. Was Lefty's silence the final act of loyalty, or was it simply the last thing he had to hold on to? Maybe it was both, because sometimes a man holds on to a code because it rewards him. He holds on to it because, without it, he doesn't know who he is.